When Evelyn Moore stepped off that mail-order bride train in Redwood Plains, Wyoming, the crowd's laughter hit her like stones. At 23, widowed and cast out by her own parents, she'd survived a journey meant to break her, only to face the worst humiliation yet. No man would claim her. The other brides whispered. The townsfolk stared. Then two small girls with wild braids pushed through the crowd, pointed at her with absolute certainty, and said the words that would change everything. We want her. Before you discover how rejection became redemption, hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far Evelyn's story travels. Now, let's begin. The Philadelphia station platform smelled of coal smoke and departing dreams. Evelyn Moore stood perfectly still amid the chaos, her worn carpet bag clutched in both hands, while her mother's final words still burned in her ears like acid. You're an embarrassment, Evelyn. A widow at your age with your condition. People talk. They whisper about how Thomas died, about what kind of wife drives a man to such despair. Your father and I have given you every chance, but you refuse to change. This is the only solution. Her father hadn't even come to see her off. He'd simply left the train ticket and $20 on the kitchen table next to a newspaper advertisement for mail-order brides needed in the Western Territories. No note, no farewell. Just the unmistakable message, leave. Evelyn had learned long ago not to cry where others could see. Tears only gave people more ammunition, more proof that she was weak, damaged, too sensitive for this world. So she'd packed her few belongings in silence, walked out of her childhood home without looking back, and boarded the westbound train with 11 other women, all of them desperate enough or hopeful enough to trade everything familiar for a chance at something different. The other women had stopped trying to include her by the second day of travel. She barely speaks, one had whispered, loud enough for Evelyn to hear. What kind of wife will she make? Look at her size, another had murmured behind a gloved hand. No wonder her husband, well, the poor man. Evelyn had turned her face to the window and watched America scroll past in shades of green and brown and endless sky. She'd learned this survival technique during her brief, disastrous marriage to Thomas Whitaker, the ability to make herself small inside her own skin, to retreat so far inward that cruel words couldn't quite reach her. Thomas had been a clerk with social ambitions and a drinking problem. Her parents had arranged the match, desperate to marry off their difficult daughter before she became a complete social liability. The marriage had lasted 8 months. Thomas had died in an accident at the warehouse where he worked, crushed beneath falling crates during an evening shift. The official report called it a tragic mishap. The gossips called it something else entirely. Divine judgment, perhaps, or the inevitable result of being married to a woman who couldn't make a proper home, couldn't manage a household, couldn't keep a man happy enough to stay sober and careful. Never mind that Thomas had been drinking long before he'd met Evelyn. Never mind that his supervisor had later admitted the warehouse's storage protocols were dangerously inadequate. Never mind that Evelyn had begged him that very morning not to work late, to come home early, to please be careful. None of that mattered to Philadelphia society. They needed someone to blame, and Evelyn, silent, soft-spoken, substantial Evelyn, made an easy target. The train had rumbled westward for 6 days, carrying its cargo of hopeful women and one who'd stopped hoping somewhere around Ohio. At night, while the others whispered about the men who'd sent for them, about ranches and new beginnings and the wild frontier, Evelyn lay in her narrow berth and wondered what would happen when they arrived in Redwood Plains and discovered the truth. She had no husband waiting. No man had sent for her. Her parents had simply found the cheapest way to remove her from their lives and seized it. The conductor had been kind enough not to comment when she'd boarded with a third-class ticket and a letter from her mother explaining that her intended would meet her at the final destination. Everyone assumed she was like the others, a woman traveling toward a new life with a man who wanted her. No one imagined she was traveling toward nothing at all. Now, as the train began its final approach to Redwood Plains, Evelyn gathered the tattered remains of her composure and tried to prepare herself for whatever came next. Through the window, she could see the town emerging from the Wyoming landscape like something from a fever dream. Raw wooden buildings, dusty streets, mountains rising in the distance like broken teeth against the sky. "Oh, look! There they are!" One of the other brides pressed her face to the glass, practically vibrating with excitement. The men, they're all waiting. The women surged toward the windows, smoothing their traveling suits, pinching color into their cheeks, arranging their hair. Evelyn stayed in her seat, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating slow and heavy as a funeral drum. The train shuddered to a stop with a shriek of brakes and a blast of steam. Outside, Evelyn could see a crowd gathered on the platform, rough men in work clothes and dusty hats, a few better-dressed gentlemen, some women in calico and homespun watching with curious eyes. Everyone had come to see the bride train arrive, to witness this monthly spectacle of Eastern women stepping into Western lives. "Come on, Evelyn." One of the younger brides grabbed her arm with thoughtless enthusiasm. "Aren't you excited? Your husband must be out there waiting." Evelyn let herself be pulled to her feet and swept along with the tide of rustling skirts and nervous laughter. What else could she do? The moment of truth had arrived. Soon everyone would know she had nowhere to go, no one to claim her, no purpose in this place at all. The conductor opened the door, and late afternoon sunlight poured into the car like something solid. Evelyn heard someone on the platform shout, "Here they come!" followed by a swell of voices, greetings, exclamations, the low rumble of masculine approval. One by one, the brides descended the steps. One by one, they were greeted by the men who'd sent for them, some with awkward formality, others with surprising warmth, all with the careful courtesy of people entering into a contract both practical and profound. Evelyn waited until last, delaying the inevitable. Finally, with no one left behind her, she had no choice but to step down onto the platform. The crowd's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The welcoming noise died into whispers. Eyes tracked her movement with open assessment. She heard the words before she saw the speakers. Just fragments at first, but enough. "Bigger than I expected." Which one sent for her? Poor fellow, whoever he is. Evelyn's face burned, but she kept her chin level and her eyes forward. She'd survived worse than this. She would survive this too. She stepped fully onto the platform, gripping her carpet bag like a shield, and prepared herself for the questions that would come. "Excuse me, miss." A thin man with spectacles and an officious air approached her, holding a clipboard. "I'm Mayor Hutchins. Welcome to Redwood Plains. And you are?" "Evelyn Moore." Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended, barely audible over the platform noise. The mayor consulted his list, frowning. Moore, I don't see that name here. Which gentleman arranged for your passage?" The whispers grew louder. Evelyn felt the weight of every eye, the pressure of collective judgment. She opened her mouth, but her throat had closed around the truth, refusing to release it. She swallowed hard. "There's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" The mayor's frown deepened. "What kind of misunderstanding?" Before Evelyn could force the words out, a woman's voice cut through the crowd, sharp with poorly concealed delight. "Oh, my stars, I don't think anyone sent for her at all. Look at her. Did you really think some poor rancher ordered that?" Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Not kind laughter. The sort that finds humor in other people's humiliation, that bonds strangers together in shared cruelty. Evelyn's vision tunneled. She'd known this moment would come, had braced herself for it during 6 days of travel, but knowing and experiencing were entirely different things. The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Her fingers tightened on the carpet bag until her knuckles ached. "Is this true, Miss Moore?" The mayor's voice had lost its welcoming warmth, replaced by bureaucratic irritation. "Did you board this train under false pretenses?" "My parents," Evelyn started, but her voice failed completely. She tried again. "They arranged for my ticket. They said—" "What? That someone here wanted you?" A man in the crowd laughed outright. "Lady, look around. Does it seem like anyone here is disappointed they didn't get you?" More laughter. Evelyn felt something inside her chest crack open, spilling shame like blood into her veins. This was worse than Philadelphia. At least there, the cruelty had been subtle, hidden behind polite facades and sympathetic expressions. Here, in this raw frontier town, people said exactly what they thought. "This is highly irregular," the mayor was saying, his face flushed with annoyance. "The mail-order bride program has specific protocols. You can't simply show up unannounced and expect—" "Expect what? Charity?" A woman in an elaborate traveling suit, one of the other brides, now standing beside a prosperous-looking older gentleman, spoke with acid sweetness. Some of us actually have value to offer our husbands. Some of us were genuinely wanted. The words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn took a step backward, then another, her instinct screaming at her to run, to hide, to escape this public dissection of her worthlessness. But where could she go? The town stretched behind the crowd, unfamiliar and hostile. The wilderness beyond offered only different dangers. She was trapped in this moment, pinned like a butterfly to a board, while strangers examined her flaws and found her wanting. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private, the mayor suggested, though his tone suggested he'd rather discuss it never. There's a boarding house that might— I'll take her. The voice came from somewhere in the crowd, male, quiet, but carrying somehow over all the noise. Evelyn couldn't locate the speaker through her blur of humiliation and gathering tears. What? The mayor turned, searching. Who said that? I did. A man stepped forward, and the crowd parted to let him through. He was tall and lean, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of Wyoming sky in winter. He wore work clothes, faded denim, a chambray shirt, scuffed boots, but carried himself with a quiet dignity that suggested he didn't care what anyone thought of his appearance. There was something guarded in his face, something held carefully in check, as though he'd learned to keep his thoughts and feelings locked away where others couldn't reach them. Evelyn recognized that expression. She saw it in her own mirror every morning. Ethan Cole, the mayor said, surprise evident in his voice. You're saying you'll take this woman, but you didn't submit a request for a bride. You said you weren't interested in remarrying. Changed my mind. Ethan's eyes moved to Evelyn for the first time, and she braced herself for the inevitable disappointment she'd seen so many times before, but his expression remained neutral, unreadable. She needs somewhere to go. I've got room. Papa! Two small voices rang out in unison, high and excited. Two girls pushed through the crowd, identical twins with tangled brown braids and faces full of fierce determination. They couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. They ran straight to the quiet man and grabbed his hands, bouncing with barely contained energy. Is she ours? The first girl demanded, pointing at Evelyn with shameless directness. Is she going to be our mama? Maya, hush, Ethan said, but without heat. I just said she needs a place to stay, that's all. But we want her, the second girl, June, Evelyn guessed, insisted. We picked her. We saw her first. You can't just pick a person like choosing a puppy, Ethan replied, but Evelyn heard something gentle beneath the words, something that suggested he understood his daughters even as he tried to impose order on their chaos. Why not? Maya demanded with unarguable logic. You said we could help choose. We choose her. The crowd's energy had shifted from mockery to fascination. Evelyn stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. This man, this stranger, was offering to take her in because his daughters had pointed at her? It made no sense. Mr. Cole, the mayor said carefully, perhaps you should reconsider. This woman has no references, no verification of character, and she clearly misrepresented her situation in order to— She needs help, Ethan interrupted, his voice still quiet, but carrying an edge now, something that suggested he wouldn't be moved once his mind was set. I'm offering it. Unless there's some law against hospitality in Redwood Plains now? The mayor's mouth thinned into a disapproving line. Of course not, but you have your daughters to think about. Taking in a strange woman of questionable— She's not strange, Maya stomped her foot. She's perfect. Look at her face, Papa. She's sad. She needs us just like we need her. Out of the mouths of children, Evelyn thought distantly, comes the kind of truth that adults spend their whole lives learning to hide. Ethan Cole looked at his daughter, then at Evelyn, then back at the mayor. My decision's made. Miss Moore, I've got a ranch about 5 miles west of town. It's not fancy, but there's a spare room and honest work if you want it. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Evelyn's throat worked, but no sound emerged. She managed a small nod. Good. Ethan turned to his daughters. Go get the wagon ready. We're heading home. The twins took off running, their earlier excitement apparently vindicated. Ethan moved toward Evelyn, and she realized he intended to take her bag. She surrendered it automatically, too overwhelmed to protest. "Can you ride?" he asked her directly, the first words he'd spoken to her alone. Yes, a little." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, rusty from disuse and shock. "That's fine. It's an easy road." He hefted her bag like it weighed nothing and started toward the edge of the platform where a wagon waited. Then he paused and looked back at her. "You coming?" It took Evelyn a moment to realize he was asking, not assuming, giving her a choice. She could refuse this strange offer, could insist on finding her own way, could maintain her independence even if it meant sleeping in the street. But the truth was simpler and harder than pride. She had nowhere else to go. She followed Ethan Cole off the platform and through the dispersing crowd. Behind her, she heard the whispers start up again, speculation and judgment mixing with surprise. Let them talk. They would anyway. At least she'd have a roof over her head while they did. The wagon was old but sturdy, the horse patient and well cared for. The twins had already climbed into the back and were arranging themselves on sacks of grain, their eyes fixed on Evelyn with unnerving intensity. Ethan helped Evelyn onto the seat with businesslike courtesy, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. He didn't speak as he guided the wagon through town, past the general store, and the saloon, and the church, with its white steeple reaching toward the endless sky. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, trying to understand what had just happened. This man had rescued her from public humiliation without knowing anything about her. His daughters, clearly starved for maternal presence, had claimed her with the absolute certainty of children who haven't yet learned that life rarely gives you what you want. None of it made sense. In Evelyn's experience, kindness always came with conditions, with expectations that would eventually be voiced, and then, when she failed to meet them, withdrawn with contempt. But for now, for this moment, she was leaving the town and the laughter behind. The wagon rolled west toward the mountains, toward a ranch she'd never seen, toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine. "Thank you," she finally whispered, so quietly she wasn't sure he'd hear. Ethan Cole didn't look at her, but his hands shifted slightly on the reins. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the place." Behind them, Maya and June started singing something tuneless and enthusiastic, already building stories about their new life, already certain that pointing at a stranger on a platform had been exactly the right thing to do. Evelyn let herself breathe for the first time since the train had pulled into the station. The ranch appeared gradually as they crested a low rise, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley between rolling hills. The main house was built of logs weathered silver gray by sun and time, with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides. Beyond it, Evelyn could see a barn, a chicken coop, several outbuildings, and endless fencing that divided the land into pastures where cattle grazed in the amber light of late afternoon. It was beautiful in a raw, unfinished way that made her chest ache with something she couldn't name. Not beautiful like Philadelphia's manicured parks and orderly streets, but beautiful, like something true, something that hadn't learned to lie about what it was. "It's not much," Ethan said as the wagon rolled into the yard, "but it keeps us fed and warm. Been in my family for 20 years. The twins jumped down before the wagon fully stopped, landing with the resilient grace of young animals. They ran ahead, shouting for Evelyn to hurry, to come see their room, to look at the kittens in the barn, to watch the sunset from the porch. Ethan set the brake and climbed down, then turned to help Evelyn. His hand was calloused and strong, his grip careful. "They're excited," he said, something almost apologetic in his tone. "It's been just the three of us for a long time. They're not used to company." Evelyn stepped down onto solid ground and realized her legs were shaking. The day's accumulated stress, the platform humiliation, the unexpected rescue, the strange journey to this unknown place hit her all at once. She swayed slightly. Ethan's hand moved to her elbow, steadying her. "You all right?" "Yes, it's been a very long day. A very long week, a very long year, a very long life." He studied her face with those winter sky eyes, and she had the unsettling feeling he understood more than she'd said. "Come inside. I'll show you where you'll sleep." "Girls, he called to the twins, who'd started chasing chickens with more enthusiasm than strategy. "Leave the birds alone and come help with supper." The interior of the house was dim and cool after the bright afternoon. Evelyn's first impression was of basic functionality, a central room that served as kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a rough-hewn table surrounded by mismatched chairs. Everything was clean but worn, practical but sparse. This was a house where people lived and worked, not a showplace meant to impress visitors. "My room's there," Ethan pointed to a closed door on the left. "Girls sleep upstairs in the loft. You'll have the spare room." He led her to a small room off the main space, barely large enough for the narrow bed and simple dresser it contained. "It's not fancy. It's perfect," Evelyn interrupted, and meant it. After 6 days on a train and the very real possibility of sleeping in the street, this small, clean room felt like sanctuary. Ethan set her carpet bag on the bed. "Privy's out back, wash basins on the dresser, water pumps by the kitchen. Supper's in about an hour. Nothing special, just stew and cornbread. You're welcome to join us or eat alone if you'd rather." The offer of privacy touched something raw in Evelyn's chest. He was giving her options, treating her like a person who might have preferences rather than someone who should be grateful for any scrap of consideration. "I'll help with supper," she heard herself say, "if that's all right." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes that suggested approval. The girls would like that. Fair warning, though. They're going to ask you about 1,000 questions. They've been after me to find them a mother for 2 years now. They think you're the answer to some kind of prayer. "I'm not," Evelyn said quietly, needing him to understand. "I'm not anyone's answer. I'm just someone who needed help." "Maybe that's enough." Ethan turned toward the door, then paused. "My wife died 3 years ago. Fever took her fast. The girls barely remember her, and I'm not good at the things mothers do. The talking and the teaching and the soft parts. So if you're willing to stay a while and help with that, I'd count it a fair trade for room and board." He left before Evelyn could respond, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, as he returned to the main room where his daughter's voices rose in excited speculation. Evelyn sank onto the narrow bed and pressed her hands to her face. She wouldn't cry. She'd survived the train station humiliation without tears. She could survive this strange kindness too. But something in her chest was cracking open, some frozen thing she'd protected for so long that she'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Through the thin walls, she heard Maya and June arguing about whether she'd like apple pie or berry pie better, and whether she could braid hair, and if she knew any good stories. She heard Ethan's lower voice cutting through their chatter, telling them to set the table and wash their hands and give their guest a moment to breathe. Guest, not burden, not obligation, not the unwanted woman someone had been forced to take in out of duty. Evelyn stood and smoothed her traveling suit, wrinkled and dusty from the journey. She'd change later, but for now she needed to show them she could be useful, could earn her place here, however long here lasted. She found the family in the kitchen area. Ethan stood at the stove stirring something in a large pot, his movements economical and practiced. The twins had set the table with enthusiastic imprecision, forks and spoons scattered randomly, plates slightly askew. "What can I do?" Evelyn asked. Maya and June turned as one, their faces lighting up like she'd offered them the greatest gift imaginable. "You can sit by us," Maya announced, "and tell us about the train and the city and everything." "Let her breathe, girls," Ethan said, but Evelyn caught the hint of amusement in his voice. "Miss Moore, if you're serious about helping, the cornbread needs mixing. Bowls on the counter, recipes in the tin beside it." Evelyn moved to the counter and found the ingredients already laid out: flour, cornmeal, salt, baking powder, an egg, milk in a pitcher. She worked quietly, mixing with steady competence born of years making do in her parents' kitchen, where cooking had been another battlefield where she'd always somehow fallen short. "You've done this before," Ethan observed. "I was married for a short time. I learned to cook." She didn't elaborate, didn't mention Thomas's complaints that everything she made was too plain, too heavy, that even bread somehow disappointed him. "How come you're not married now?" June asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. "Did he die?" "Papa's wife died. That's why he's sad sometimes, even when he smiles." "June," Ethan's voice carried a warning note. "It's all right," Evelyn said, pouring the batter into the waiting pan. "Yes, my husband died. It was an accident at his work." "Do you miss him?" Maya asked, watching Evelyn's face with unsettling intensity. Evelyn slid the cornbread into the oven before answering. "I miss the person I hoped he would be." "Does that make sense?" Both girls nodded solemnly, as though this made perfect sense to them. Perhaps it did. Perhaps children understood the difference between reality and hope better than adults who'd learned to confuse the two. Supper was simple but surprisingly pleasant. The stew was thick with vegetables and beef, seasoned well enough to make Evelyn's stomach remind her she'd barely eaten all day. The cornbread came out golden and steaming. They ate together at the rough table while evening light slanted through the windows and turned everything amber. The twins peppered Evelyn with questions between bites. Where was she from? What did Philadelphia look like? Had she ever seen the ocean? Did she know how to ride a horse properly? Could she read? Would she teach them new songs? Did she think their kittens were the cutest kittens in all of Wyoming? Ethan mostly listened, occasionally redirecting when the questions got too personal or the twins' enthusiasm overwhelmed their manners. But Evelyn noticed he was listening not just to her answers, but to the tone beneath them, cataloging information the way a careful man does when he's trying to understand something complex. After supper, the twins insisted on showing Evelyn their loft bedroom. A cozy space under the eaves with 2 small beds, a shared trunk for clothes, and an impressive collection of treasures spread across every available surface. Rocks, feathers, interesting pieces of wood, a bird's nest, 3 ancient dolls with most of their hair loved off. "This is everything we found," Maya explained proudly. "Papa says we're pack rats, but June says we're collectors, and that's different." "It is different," Evelyn agreed, examining a particularly beautiful piece of quartz with genuine interest. "Collectors choose carefully. They see value in things others might overlook." Both girls beamed at this validation. That night, lying in her narrow bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of ranch life settling into darkness, Evelyn tried to make sense of what had happened. One day ago, she'd been on a train, traveling toward nothing. Now she was in a stranger's home, welcomed by children who'd decided she belonged here based on nothing but instinct. It couldn't last. Nothing good ever did, not for her. Eventually, Ethan would realize his mistake. Eventually, the girls would see her flaws and lose interest. Eventually, she'd disappoint them all and find herself back where she'd started, alone and unwanted. But for tonight, she had a clean bed and a full stomach, and the sound of gentle breathing from the loft above where 2 little girls slept soundly, still convinced they'd chosen exactly right. For tonight, that was enough. Morning arrived with the twins' voices carrying up from the kitchen, high and bright as bird calls. Evelyn woke disoriented, forgetting for a moment where she was, expecting to see the familiar water-stained ceiling of her parents' Philadelphia row house or the swaying lamp of the train car. Instead, pale sunlight filtered through unfamiliar curtains, and the smell of coffee drifted through the gap under her door. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 serviceable dresses, pinned her hair into a simple knot, and emerged to find chaos cheerfully underway. Maya stood on a chair at the stove, wielding a wooden spoon over a pan of what might have been eggs, but looked more like scrambled catastrophe. June was setting the table with the same creative interpretation of order she'd displayed the night before. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. "Papa's already out with the cattle," Maya announced without looking up from her cooking efforts. "He said we should let you sleep, but we got hungry, and June said we could make breakfast ourselves, and I said we'd done it before, which is sort of true, and oh no, these are burning!" Smoke began rising from the pan. Evelyn crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, gently moving Maya aside and rescuing what remained of the eggs. "It's all right. The pan was too hot, that's all. See? If you lower the heat and add a little milk, they'll turn out fine." She demonstrated, whisking in milk and reducing the flame while both girls watched with rapt attention. Within minutes, she'd salvaged the eggs, toasted bread over the stovetop, and poured milk into 3 cups. The twins attacked breakfast with the unselfconscious hunger of young animals while Evelyn ate more slowly, still adjusting to the strangeness of this new routine. "Papa usually just gives us cold biscuits in the morning," June said through a mouthful of eggs. "This is way better. Will you make breakfast every day?" "June, don't talk with your mouth full," Maya scolded, then immediately added her own mouthful question. "Can you teach us to cook like you?" Evelyn felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Not quite happiness, but perhaps the memory of what happiness felt like. I can teach you, if your father says it's all right. He will, both girls chorused with absolute certainty. After breakfast, the twins pulled Evelyn outside to show her the ranch in daylight. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and pine from the distant mountains. Everything seemed bigger here, more vivid, the sky impossibly blue, the land rolling away in all directions, the silence broken only by cattle lowing and the wind moving through the grass. That's the barn where the kittens live. Maya pointed to a weathered structure with missing boards in the upper loft. And that's the chicken coop. But you have to watch out for the rooster because he's mean. And over there's the smokehouse and the root cellar, and that's where we keep the wagon when it's not being used, and... Maya, breathe, June interrupted. You're going to pass out. I am not. I'm just showing her everything because she needs to know where everything is if she's going to stay, and... Girls. Ethan's voice carried across the yard. Evelyn turned to see him walking toward them from the direction of the pastures, his shirt already dark with sweat despite the early hour. He looked tired, she thought, the kind of bone-deep tired that came from carrying too much for too long. We made breakfast, Maya announced proudly. Well, Miss Moore helped, but we cracked the eggs ourselves and everything. Did you burn down my kitchen in the process? Ethan asked, but his eyes were on Evelyn, assessing. Only a little bit, June said cheerfully. The corner of Ethan's mouth twitched. Good to know. Miss Moore, the girls aren't bothering you too much, I hope. Not at all. They were showing me around. I bet they were. He pulled off his work gloves and tucked them in his belt. I've got fence repairs in the south pasture that'll take most of the day. The girls can help you get settled, show you where things are. There's food in the root cellar if you want to make dinner later, but no pressure. We can make do with beans and cornbread if cooking's not something you're up for. It was another choice, Evelyn realized. Another moment where he refused to assume or demand, where he treated her presence as voluntary rather than obligatory. I'll make dinner, she said. It's the least I can do. Something flickered across Ethan's face. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or simple acknowledgement. Appreciated. Girls, you help Miss Moore with whatever she needs, understand? And stay out of trouble. We're always out of trouble, Maya protested. That's not what out of trouble means, June corrected. Ethan shook his head and walked back toward the barn, his stride long and purposeful. Evelyn watched him go and wondered what his story was, what had carved those lines around his eyes and taught him to be so careful with his words. Papa doesn't talk much, Maya said, following Evelyn's gaze. He used to, before Mama died. June and I don't remember her very well, but Papa says she could make him laugh about anything. Now he mostly just works. People grieve in different ways, Evelyn said quietly. Sometimes work is how they survive it. Is that how you survived? June asked with that disconcerting childhood directness. When your husband died, did you work? Evelyn considered the question honestly. No, I tried to be smaller and quieter, hoping that would be enough. It never was. Both girls looked at her with identical expressions of thoughtful concern, as though they were trying to solve a puzzle they didn't quite understand. Then Maya grabbed her hand with sticky fingers and said, Well, you don't have to be small here. Papa says Wyoming's got room for everybody. The days developed a rhythm that surprised Evelyn with its simple functionality. She woke early, started coffee, and helped the twins with breakfast. Ethan would already be outside, checking the cattle or mending fences or handling the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch running. He'd come in for meals, eat quickly, and disappear back into the work that never seemed to end. The twins followed Evelyn like devoted shadows, chattering constantly, asking endless questions, creating small disasters with impressive regularity. They showed her where the chickens laid their eggs in unlikely places, which horse was gentle enough for beginners to ride, how to pump water from the well without splashing yourself too badly. They taught her the ranch's geography, which pastures held which cattle, where the property lines ran, which neighbor was friendly, and which one argued about everything. In return, Evelyn taught them things their father couldn't. How to knead bread dough until it felt alive under their hands. How to mend their own torn dresses with small, invisible stitches. How to read with expression instead of just recognizing words. How to brush and braid each other's wild hair into something approaching neatness. She cleaned the house without being asked, not because she felt obligated, but because the work gave her purpose, and because she couldn't stand seeing dust gather in corners that clearly bothered no one else. She cooked meals that went beyond basic survival. Roasted chicken with herbs from the struggling garden, vegetable stew thick enough to stick to your ribs, apple pie made from the withered fruit she found in the root cellar. Ethan noticed. He didn't say much, but Evelyn saw his surprise the first time he came in to find the main room scrubbed clean and smelling of lye soap. Saw his careful appreciation when dinner was more than beans and cornbread. Saw the way he watched his daughters laughing over some small thing Evelyn had said, their faces bright with uncomplicated joy. On the fourth evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Ethan lingered at the table instead of immediately retreating to his own room. "You don't have to do all this," he said quietly, gesturing at the clean kitchen, the folded laundry, the basket of mended clothes waiting to be put away. "That wasn't part of the arrangement." "What was the arrangement, exactly?" Evelyn asked, genuinely curious. "You never specified terms." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she'd learned meant he was uncomfortable. "Honestly, I didn't think that far ahead. You needed help. I could provide it. Seemed simple enough. Nothing's ever simple." "No," he agreed. "I suppose not." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "The girls are happier than I've seen them in years. I don't know what you're doing differently, but it's working." Evelyn folded the dish towel in her hands, creasing it precisely. "I'm just treating them like people worth listening to, that's all." "That's not all, and you know it." Ethan stood, pushing his chair back. "Anyway, I wanted to say thank you, and that you're welcome to stay as long as you want. No obligations, no expectations. Just, if you're comfortable here, you've got a place." He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the floor as he retreated to his room. Evelyn sat alone in the lamplight and tried to identify the feeling spreading through her chest. It took her a long time to recognize it as something close to belonging. Sunday brought a complication Evelyn hadn't anticipated. The twins woke her before dawn, bouncing with barely contained energy. "It's church day," Maya announced, as though this were the most exciting event imaginable. "We have to leave early because Papa drives slow and the service starts at 10, and we can't be late because Mrs. Hutchins gives you the evil eye if you come in after the first hymn." Evelyn's stomach clenched. She'd forgotten about church, about the fact that small frontier towns built their social lives around Sunday services, about the reality that she'd have to face the people who'd mocked her on the platform. "I think I'll stay here," she said carefully. "I'm not feeling well." Both girls' faces fell in perfect synchronization. "But you have to come," June protested. "Everyone will want to meet you properly, and we want to show you off. And Papa always looks so lonely, sitting by himself with just us, and... Girls, let Miss Moore decide for herself." Ethan appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his Sunday clothes. Dark trousers, a white shirt that made his tanned face look even more weathered, a string tie that suggested he'd made an effort. If she's not feeling up to it, that's her choice. But Maya had already grabbed Evelyn's hand, her small face pleading. "Please, please come. Mrs. Patterson makes cookies after service and shares them with everyone, and they're singing, and it's nice, really it is." Evelyn looked at those earnest faces, at Ethan's carefully neutral expression that suggested he'd support whatever she decided, and realized she couldn't hide forever. If she was going to stay here, even temporarily, she'd have to face the town eventually. "All right," she heard herself say. "I'll come." The church was smaller than she'd expected. A simple white building with a modest steeple and windows that let in the morning light. Wagons and horses filled the yard, families gathering in clusters, children running between the adults with that peculiar freedom that came from being outdoors before being confined to pews and expected behavior. Evelyn felt every eye turn toward them as Ethan's wagon rolled into the churchyard. The whispers started immediately, spreading like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. She kept her chin level and her hands folded in her lap, preparing herself for whatever came next. "Ignore them," Ethan said quietly, just for her. "Small towns gossip. It's their primary entertainment. Doesn't mean you have to care." Easy for him to say, Evelyn thought. He belonged here. She was the stranger, the woman who'd arrived under false pretenses, and immediately attached herself to a widower and his daughters. Of course they'd talk. The twins jumped down and immediately ran to join a group of other children. Ethan helped Evelyn from the wagon with the same careful courtesy he'd shown since that first day, his hand steady at her elbow. "Ethan Cole!" A woman's voice rang out, sharp with artificial sweetness. "What a surprise to see you brought company!" The speaker was perhaps 40, dressed in her finest calico with a hat that suggested she'd ordered it from a catalog. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she approached, trailing two other women who looked equally curious and disapproving. "Mrs. Hutchins," Ethan greeted her with polite restraint. "Miss Moore, this is the mayor's wife. Mrs. Hutchins, Evelyn Moore." "Oh, we've met." Mrs. Hutchins' gaze raked over Evelyn like she was evaluating livestock. "At the train station. Such a memorable arrival." "Indeed," Evelyn managed, her voice steady despite the heat climbing up her neck. "And now you're staying at the Cole Ranch?" One of the other women leaned in with predatory interest. "How very convenient. A widow and a widower, living under the same roof. I'm sure it's all perfectly proper, of course." "It is," Ethan said, his voice gone cold. "Miss Moore has the spare room and helps with the girls, that's all." Of course, of course." Mrs. Hutchins' smile sharpened. "We're not suggesting anything inappropriate. It's just that people talk, Ethan. You know how it is. A man in your position has to be careful about appearances." "I'm careful about what matters," Ethan replied. "Appearances aren't high on that list." Before Mrs. Hutchins could respond, a bell rang from the church entrance, signaling the start of service. The crowd began moving toward the door, conversations breaking off mid-sentence as people filed inside. Ethan offered Evelyn his arm. "Ready?" She took it, grateful for the solid warmth of him beside her as they entered the church. The twins had saved them seats near the middle, and Evelyn slid into the pew between June and Ethan, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her like smoke. The service was simple and earnest, the young preacher clearly more comfortable with frontier pragmatism than theological complexity. He spoke about community and kindness, about welcoming strangers and seeing value where others saw only burden. Evelyn wondered if he'd chosen his topic deliberately, if news of her arrival had reached even the pulpit. During the hymns, she discovered that Maya and June sang with enthusiastic imprecision, that Ethan had a surprisingly good baritone he kept carefully controlled, and that she herself had almost forgotten what it felt like to raise her voice alongside others and feel part of something larger than her own small existence. After the service, the congregation spilled out into the sunshine for the social hour that seemed more important than the worship itself. Tables had been set up with donated food, and the children immediately scattered to play while the adults gathered in shifting groups, their conversations a low buzz of news and gossip and the endless small negotiations of community life. "Miss Moore," a woman approached, older than Mrs. Hutchins, with a kind face and hands gnarled by years of work. "I'm Sarah Patterson. I wanted to welcome you properly to Redwood Plains." "Thank you," Evelyn said, surprised by the genuine warmth in the woman's voice. "Don't mind the gossips," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Half of them arrived here under questionable circumstances themselves, and have spent 20 years trying to forget it. You're doing good work with those Cole girls. Anyone with eyes can see it. They're wonderful children." "They are now." Mrs. Patterson glanced across the churchyard to where Maya and June were showing a group of other children something they'd found, their faces bright with importance. 6 months ago, they were running wild. No mother to guide them, and Ethan working himself to death trying to be both parents. "You've made a difference already." Before Evelyn could respond, a commotion erupted near the food tables. Maya's voice rose above the general noise, sharp with indignation. "Take it back." Evelyn turned to see Maya facing off against a boy perhaps a year or two older, her small hands clenched into fists. June stood beside her sister in identical defensive posture. "I don't have to take it back because it's true," the boy shouted. "My ma said your new lady's too fat to be anybody's real wife, and she probably tricked your pa into taking her in." The churchyard went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward the confrontation. Evelyn felt the familiar heat of shame flooding through her, the instinct to shrink, to hide, to disappear. But before she could move, Ethan was already striding across the yard, his face set in hard lines. "Tommy Johnson," he said quietly, and something in his tone made the boy step back. What did you just say? The boy's courage faltered. My ma said, I don't care what your ma said. You apologize to my daughters right now, or I'll have words with your father about teaching you manners. But she's a guest in my home, Ethan interrupted, and she's done nothing but help my family, which is more than I can say for people who stand around talking about things that aren't their business. He raised his voice slightly, addressing the watching crowd. Anyone else got comments about Miss Moore they'd like to share? Because I'm happy to discuss it right here, right now. The silence stretched. No one met his eyes. Mrs. Johnson, a pinch-faced woman with her arms crossed tight, finally spoke up. We're just concerned about propriety, Ethan. Surely you can understand. What I understand, Ethan cut her off, is that when I needed help, Miss Moore stepped up without asking anything in return. She's teaching my daughters things I can't teach them. She's bringing warmth back into a house that's been cold too long. And if that bothers anyone here, that's their problem, not mine. He turned to Evelyn, who stood frozen by the food tables, fighting the urge to run. Come on, we're leaving. Papa, we didn't get cookies yet, Maya protested. We'll make our own cookies at home, Ethan replied. Better ones. He gathered his daughters and Evelyn with a gesture and headed toward the wagon, his spine straight, his jaw set. The ride home was quiet. The twins, subdued by the confrontation, sat in the back without their usual chatter. Ethan drove with his eyes fixed on the road, his hands tight on the reins. Evelyn stared at her lap and tried to breathe around the tightness in her chest. I'm sorry, she finally said. I've brought trouble to your family. No. Ethan's voice was firm. Small-minded people brought trouble. You just gave them an excuse to show their true colors. But the twins, they were fighting because of me, because of what people think about. The twins were fighting because they've got spirit and they don't like injustice. He glanced at her briefly. That's not something to apologize for. Neither is existing in a body that doesn't match what narrow people think it should look like. The bluntness of it struck Evelyn silent. In Philadelphia, no one had ever acknowledged her size directly. It was always coded in other criticisms. Her difficulty finding suitable clothes, her unsuitability as a social companion, the vague suggestions that she needed to take better care of herself. Ethan's directness was almost shocking in its honesty. People have always, she started, then stopped, unsure how to finish. People have always been cruel to anything different, Ethan finished for her. Doesn't make them right. Just makes them predictable. When they reached the ranch, the twins disappeared to their loft, still subdued. Ethan unhitched the horse while Evelyn stood in the yard, feeling unmoored and uncertain. I should leave, she said when he emerged from the barn. I'm causing problems for you. Ethan stopped, wiped his hands on his trousers, and looked at her with those winter sky eyes. Is that what you want? To leave? No, she admitted. But what I want doesn't what? Matter? He stepped closer. Miss Moore? Evelyn? I'm going to be straight with you. I don't care what the town thinks. I care that my daughters are happier than they've been in 3 years. I care that my house feels like a home again, instead of just a place where we sleep between work. I care that you've been here less than a week, and you've already made more difference than I could have hoped for. So unless you're miserable here, unless you genuinely want to leave, I'd appreciate it if you'd stay. Evelyn looked at this quiet, guarded man who'd defended her in front of his entire community, who'd seen her value when no one else had, who was offering her something she'd stopped believing existed, a place where she might actually belong. I'll stay, she whispered. Something in Ethan's expression eased, a tension releasing that she hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Good. Now come inside. I believe we promised the girls homemade cookies, and I have no idea how to make them. I do, Evelyn said, and felt the smallest smile tug at her lips. That evening, with the kitchen full of flour dust and laughter, with Maya and June arguing cheerfully about whose cookie was shaped better, with Ethan leaning against the counter watching them all with something almost like peace in his eyes, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found somewhere she could stop running. Outside, the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Inside, the coal ranch felt, for the first time in years, like a family lived there. The cookies became a tradition. Every Sunday after that disastrous church visit, Evelyn and the twins spent the afternoon baking while Ethan caught up on paperwork or mended equipment. The kitchen would fill with warmth and sweetness, and by evening, they'd have jars full of cookies that never lasted more than a few days. The twins treated it like a sacred ritual, and Evelyn found herself looking forward to it with an anticipation that surprised her. 3 weeks after her arrival, the routine had settled into something comfortable. Evelyn rose before dawn, started coffee, and often found Ethan already in the kitchen, his hair damp from washing at the pump, his eyes still heavy with sleep. They'd share those quiet morning minutes in companionable silence while the sky lightened beyond the windows, and Evelyn would try not to notice how the lamplight caught the strong lines of his profile, or how his rare smiles changed his entire face. She was careful not to let herself feel too much. This wasn't her home, not really. She was here on borrowed time, a temporary solution to a permanent problem. Eventually, Ethan would meet someone suitable, someone the town would accept, someone who could be a proper wife and mother. When that happened, Evelyn would need to be ready to leave without complaint, but the twins made it hard to maintain that emotional distance. "Tell us about Philadelphia again," Maya demanded one afternoon while they worked in the garden, pulling weeds from around struggling bean plants. "About the big buildings and all the people." "Yeah, and the fancy dresses," June added, dirt smudging her cheek. "Did you have fancy dresses?" "A few," Evelyn admitted, remembering the uncomfortable corsets and heavy fabrics her mother had insisted proper young women wore. But they weren't very practical. You couldn't run or climb or do much of anything useful in them. "Then why wear them?" Maya asked with perfect logic. "Because that's what people expected. In the city, appearances matter more than comfort." Evelyn tugged a particularly stubborn weed free. "Out here seems different." "Papa says people should be judged by their work, not their looks," June said solemnly. "He says talk is cheap, but sweat tells the truth." Evelyn smiled at the very Ethan-like pronouncement. "Your papa's a wise man." "He's lonely, though," Maya said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We hear him sometimes at night, walking around. He can't sleep good since Mama died." Something in Evelyn's chest tightened. She'd heard it too, those restless footsteps in the hours between midnight and dawn, the quiet sounds of a man trying not to disturb anyone while wrestling with ghosts only he could see. "Grief takes its own time," she said gently. "There's no rushing it." "Do you get sad at night too?" June asked. "About your husband?" Evelyn considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. But mostly I feel sad about the life I thought I'd have." "Does that make sense?" Both girls nodded, their small faces serious. They understood disappointment, she realized. They'd lost their mother too young, had watched their father retreat into work and silence, had spent years hoping for something to fill the emptiness in their home. "We're glad you're here," Maya said suddenly, fiercely. "Even if Papa doesn't say it much, we know he's glad too. The house feels better now, less empty." Before Evelyn could respond, thunder rumbled in the distance. All three of them looked up to see dark clouds building over the mountains, moving fast toward the valley. "Storm's coming," June observed. "A big one, looks like." They'd had rain before, brief afternoon showers that cooled the air and settled the dust. But this looked different. The clouds were bruised purple and building tall, and the wind had shifted direction, carrying the electric smell of lightning. Ethan appeared from the barn, moving with purposeful urgency. "Girls, help Miss Moore get everything inside. Secure the chicken coop and make sure the barn doors are latched. This one's going to be rough." The next hour passed in controlled chaos. They brought in tools and buckets, secured anything that might blow away, herded protesting chickens into their coop and the horses into the barn. The wind picked up, whipping Evelyn's skirts around her legs and tearing loose strands of hair from her careful bun. The sky darkened until it looked like early evening, though the sun wouldn't set for hours yet. "Get inside!" Ethan called to them over the rising wind. He was checking the barn one last time, his shirt plastered to his back with sweat despite the cooling air. "I need to bring the cattle in from the south pasture before this hits full force." "I'll help," Evelyn heard herself say. Ethan turned, surprise clear on his face. "You can't. It's not safe. This storm's going to be bad." You can't move 200 head of cattle alone, Evelyn pointed out, with a practicality she'd learned from watching him work. You need help. She's right, Papa, Maya called from the porch where she and June huddled. You always say 2 hands are better than 1. Ethan looked torn, clearly wanting to refuse but knowing she was right. Finally, he nodded sharply. Can you really ride? Well enough, Evelyn said, hoping it was true. He saddled 2 horses with swift efficiency while the wind howled and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Evelyn hauled herself onto the gentler mare, grateful for the side saddle even though she knew it would make real work harder. Ethan mounted his gelding in one fluid motion and looked at her with concern evident in his eyes. Stay behind me. If things get dangerous, you head straight back to the house. Don't argue. Just go. Understood? Understood. They rode out as the storm broke in earnest. Rain came down in sheets, cold and hard, soaking them both within minutes. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed by thunder that shook the ground beneath the horses' hooves. Evelyn clung to the saddle and focused on keeping her seat while her mare danced nervously beneath her. The cattle were scattered across the south pasture, already agitated by the storm. Ethan shouted instructions that Evelyn barely heard over the wind and rain, but she understood the basic idea: circle around behind them, push them toward the barn and the shelter of the near pastures. It should have been simple. It wasn't. The cattle were spooked, breaking in different directions every time lightning flashed. Ethan worked his horse with practiced skill, cutting off runners and turning them back toward the group, but there were too many and the storm was getting worse. Evelyn did her best to help, positioning her mare to block gaps and wave her arms at stubborn cows who wanted to bolt. Then everything went wrong at once. A massive lightning bolt struck a tree at the pasture's edge, splitting it with a crack like artillery fire. The cattle panicked completely, stampeding in pure terror. Evelyn's mare reared, nearly throwing her, and by the time she'd regained control, she'd lost sight of Ethan in the chaos of running cattle and driving rain. "Ethan!" she screamed, but the wind tore his name away. She fought to turn her terrified horse, scanning desperately for any sign of him. Finally, she spotted him near the broken fence line, his gelding limping badly, Ethan himself on the ground trying to turn a knot of panicking cattle away from a washout that would break their legs if they ran into it. Without thinking, Evelyn kicked her mare forward. The horse responded with surprising courage, plunging into the herd despite her fear. Evelyn waved her arms and shouted, adding her voice to Ethan's, helping turn the cattle at the last possible moment. It worked. The herd veered away from the washout, streaming past them towards safer ground. But in their panic, they kept running, disappearing into the rain and darkness. Ethan limped toward her, favoring his left leg, his face pale beneath the mud and rain. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Are you?" She could see he was, but needed to hear him say it. "Horse stepped in a hole, threw me. Think I twisted something, but it'll keep." He looked at his limping gelding with clear concern. "He can't carry me like this, though." "Take my horse. I'll walk back." "The hell you will. We'll both walk." He took the mare's reins and started leading her toward home, his limp pronounced now that the immediate crisis had passed. Evelyn fell in beside him, too worried to argue. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. The wind strong enough now to push them sideways, the rain so heavy they could barely see 10 feet ahead. They'd made it perhaps halfway back when Evelyn heard it, high voices calling through the storm, young and terrified. "Papa, Papa, where are you?" Her blood turned to ice. "The twins." Ethan's face went white. "I told them to stay in the house. Why would they—" He tried to run despite his injured leg and nearly fell. Evelyn grabbed his arm. "You can't run on that leg. Where would they go?" "The barn, maybe, looking for us. Or—" His voice cracked. "The creek. It runs behind the property. If they tried to cross it in this rain, if the water's risen—" They ran then, both of them, Ethan's limp forgotten in pure terror. The mare followed obediently, her reins trailing. Evelyn's skirts tangled around her legs, heavy with water and mud, but she gathered them and forced her body to move faster than it ever had before. They found Maya first, standing at the creek bank, screaming her sister's name into the storm. The water that was usually a gentle trickle had become a raging torrent, brown with mud and debris. "June!" Maya sobbed when she saw them. She's in the water. She fell and I couldn't reach her and—" Evelyn didn't wait to hear more. She plunged into the creek, the current immediately trying to sweep her legs out from under her. The water was shockingly cold and moving fast, full of branches and rocks that battered against her. "June!" she called, scanning desperately. "June, where are you?" There. A flash of blue fabric caught on a fallen tree about 20 yards downstream. Evelyn pushed toward it, fighting the current with every step, her waterlogged skirts trying to drag her under. She reached the tree just as June's grip started to slip. The girl was crying, her face scraped and bleeding, her small body shaking with cold and fear. Evelyn grabbed her with both arms and held on with every ounce of strength she possessed. "I've got you," she gasped. "I've got you, sweetheart. You're safe now." But getting back was harder than getting there. The current wanted to take them both, and Evelyn's feet kept slipping on the muddy creek bottom. She could hear Ethan shouting from the bank, but couldn't make out words over the roar of water. Then she felt something solid press against her back. The mare had waded in, offering her body as an anchor. Evelyn grabbed the stirrup with her free hand while keeping June clutched tight with the other, and let the horse's steady strength pull them toward the bank. Ethan met them at the edge, taking June from Evelyn's arms and crushing his daughter against his chest. Maya threw herself at both of them, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Evelyn collapsed onto the muddy bank, her lungs burning, her whole body shaking with cold and reaction. They made it back to the house somehow, all four of them and the faithful mare who'd saved them. Ethan carried June despite his injured leg, while Maya clung to Evelyn's hand and refused to let go. By the time they stumbled through the door, they were all hypothermic and shaking, covered in mud and blood and creek water. The next hours blurred together, getting everyone out of wet clothes, starting a fire despite hands that trembled too badly to strike matches. Wrapping the twins in every blanket they owned, while Evelyn made hot tea with shaking hands. Examining June's injuries, scrapes and bruises, but miraculously nothing broken. Checking Maya for shock while the girl cried and apologized over and over. "We just wanted to help," Maya sobbed against Evelyn's shoulder. "We thought we could bring the cattle in closer, and then you and Papa wouldn't have to work so hard in the storm, and we thought we knew the way, but then the creek was so high, and June slipped, and—" "Hush," Evelyn soothed, stroking the girl's wet hair. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." But June wasn't safe. Not completely. As the night deepened and the storm finally began to ease, it became clear something was wrong. The girl's breathing sounded labored, rattling in her chest. Her skin was too hot despite the cold she'd suffered. "Creek fever," Ethan said grimly, pressing his hand to June's forehead. "She breathed in too much dirty water. Her lungs are fighting it." For 3 days, June burned with fever. Evelyn barely slept, sitting beside the girl's bed, bathing her with cool cloths, coaxing spoonfuls of broth between cracked lips, monitoring every breath. Maya refused to leave her sister's side, curling up on the bed and holding June's hand while tears streaked her face. Ethan hovered nearby, his usual control fracturing under the weight of helpless fear. He paced the small room, his injured leg forgotten, his face haggard. "She can't—" He started once, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Evelyn understood. He couldn't survive losing another person he loved. The grief from his wife's death still carved hollows in his eyes. Losing June would break him completely. On the third night, when June's fever finally broke and she opened her eyes and asked, in a small, hoarse voice, if she could have some water, Evelyn felt something in her own chest break open. A dam she'd built years ago to protect herself from caring too much, from letting people matter enough to hurt her. She loved these girls, loved them with a fierceness that terrified her. And looking at Ethan's face as he held his daughter and wept with quiet relief, she realized with dawning horror that she loved him too. Not the careful, measured affection she'd felt for Thomas, built on duty and expectation. This was something raw and consuming, the kind of love that changed the shape of your life, whether you wanted it to or not. She loved a man who saw her as a helpful presence in his daughters' lives, nothing more. She loved children who would eventually need a real mother, someone the town would accept, someone who could give them the social standing they deserved. She loved a life that could never truly be hers. The realization hurt worse than any cruelty she'd ever suffered. That night, after June was sleeping peacefully, and Maya had finally consented to go to her own bed, Evelyn sat alone by the dying fire and tried to figure out what to do with this impossible love she'd developed. She heard Ethan's footsteps before she saw him. He emerged from the twins' room and sank into the chair across from her, his face exhausted but peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saving her, for staying up with her, for everything." "You don't have to thank me. I love her." The words slipped out before Evelyn could stop them. "I love both of them." Ethan's expression shifted, became something softer and more complicated. "They love you too. They've been asking if you're going to stay forever, if you'll really be their mother." Evelyn's heart clenched. "What did you tell them?" "That it's not my decision to make, that you have to want to stay." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes steady on hers. "Do you want to stay, Evelyn?" It was the first time he'd used her given name without the Miss Moore attached. The intimacy of it made her breath catch. "I want to," she admitted. "But wanting something doesn't make it right. The town will never accept me as your wife. The girls deserve better than the scandal of—" "The girls deserve a mother who loves them," Ethan interrupted. "Everything else is just noise." He stood and crossed the small distance between them, then did something that shocked her into silence. He knelt in front of her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. "I know we started this arrangement out of necessity. I know I offered you shelter when you needed it, nothing more. But somewhere along the way, it became something different, for me at least." Evelyn's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. "Ethan, let me finish." His voice was rough with emotion. "I've been dead inside since Sarah died. Just going through the motions, doing what needed doing, not letting myself feel anything because feeling meant hurting. Then you walked into our lives and everything changed. The house feels warm again. The girls laugh again. And I—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I feel alive again. Because of you. I'm not—" Evelyn tried to find words for all her inadequacies, all the reasons this couldn't work. "People talk. They think I'm wrong for you, that I'm not suitable." "People talk about everyone," Ethan said firmly. "Let them talk. I don't care about suitable. I care about real, and you're the most real thing that's happened to me in years." Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You should want someone prettier, someone the town respects, someone who can give you—" "I want someone who risks her life in a flooding creek to save my daughter," Ethan interrupted. "I want someone who sits up for 3 days nursing a sick child without complaint. I want someone who sees my girls for who they are instead of what they should be. I want you, Evelyn, if you'll have me." The tears spilled over then, hot against her cold cheeks. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid of believing this is real, and then losing it." "I'm afraid too," Ethan admitted, "but I'm more afraid of letting fear make my decisions. I spent 3 years being afraid to live. I'm done with that." He took her hands in his grip warm and solid and sure. "Stay with us, not as a housekeeper or a helper, but as my wife, as their mother. Make this temporary thing permanent. The town will adjust or they won't. I don't care." His voice was fierce now. "You stood up to a stampede and a flood for my family. I can stand up to some gossips. Question is, can you? Can you believe you deserve this?" That was the real question, wasn't it? Could she believe she deserved happiness, deserved love, deserved a place where she belonged? Her parents had spent years convincing her she didn't. Philadelphia society had confirmed it. Even Thomas, in his way, had reinforced the message that she was fundamentally lacking. But Ethan was looking at her like she was everything he needed. The twins had chosen her before they even knew her name. This rough frontier home had welcomed her when the city that raised her had cast her out. Maybe, just maybe, everyone who'd told her she wasn't enough had been wrong. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you." Ethan's face transformed, a smile breaking across it like sunrise. He stood, pulling her up with him, and wrapped his arms around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. Through the window, the storm clouds were finally clearing, and the first stars were appearing in the black Wyoming sky. Morning came soft and golden, the storm's violence replaced by a stillness so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. Evelyn woke in her narrow bed and for a moment wondered if the previous night had been a dream, conjured by exhaustion and fear. Then she heard voices from the kitchen, heard Ethan's low rumble and the twins' excited chatter, and knew it was real. He'd asked her to marry him. She'd said yes. The enormity of it settled over her like a physical weight. She sat up slowly, her body aching from the creek ordeal, and tried to reconcile who she'd been a month ago with who she was becoming. The woman who'd stepped off that train had been broken, convinced of her own worthlessness, expecting nothing but more rejection. This woman, the one sitting in dawn light in a Wyoming ranch house, had just agreed to build a life with people who wanted her. The transformation felt impossible, but then so had surviving the flood. So had Ethan kneeling before her and saying he wanted her exactly as she was. She dressed carefully, her hands trembling slightly as she pinned her hair. When she emerged from her room, she found the twins at the table eating oatmeal while Ethan stood at the stove, his back to her. The domestic scene was so normal, so ordinary, that for a moment she forgot everything had changed. Then Maya looked up and her face split into a grin. "Papa told us, you're going to stay forever and be our real mama." June, still pale from her illness but clearly recovering, bounced in her chair despite Ethan's warning to sit still. "Are we going to have a wedding? Can we wear fancy dresses? Will there be cake?" Ethan turned from the stove, and the look he gave Evelyn held warmth that made her breath catch. "I told them we'd discuss the details together. But yes, there will be a wedding." He paused, something uncertain crossing his face. "Unless you want more time to think about it? I know I sprung it on you last night, and you were exhausted." "I don't need more time," Evelyn said firmly, surprising herself with her own certainty. "I meant what I said." Relief washed over Ethan's features. He crossed to her and, with the twins watching with delighted interest, took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Good. Then I suppose we should start planning." Planning, it turned out, was complicated by the fact that getting married meant facing the town again. Evelyn's first instinct was to suggest a quiet ceremony, just them and the preacher, avoiding the spectacle and judgment that a public wedding would invite. But Ethan had other ideas. "We do this properly," he said that afternoon while the twins napped, June still needing extra rest. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee growing cold between them. Church wedding, town invited, the whole thing. "I won't have people thinking I'm ashamed of marrying you or that we have something to hide." "But the gossip will happen whether we hide or not," Ethan interrupted gently. "At least this way we face it head on and make it clear we don't care what they think. We're building a family here, Evelyn. That requires courage, not shame." She studied his face, seeing the determination there, the quiet strength that had drawn her to him from the start. He was asking her to be brave in a way she'd never managed before, to stand up in front of the people who'd mocked her and claim her place among them. "I don't know if I can," she admitted quietly. Ethan reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "You jumped into a flooding creek to save my daughter. You faced down a cattle stampede in a lightning storm. You can handle some small-town gossips." He made it sound simple. Evelyn wasn't sure it was, but his faith in her made her want to try. Word of their engagement spread through Redwood Plains faster than creek water in a storm. Within 2 days, everyone in town knew that Ethan Cole was marrying the mail-order bride who'd arrived under false pretenses. The reactions varied from genuine happiness to barely concealed disapproval, with most people falling somewhere in the uncomfortable middle. Mrs. Patterson stopped by the ranch the day after Ethan rode into town to speak with the preacher. She brought a basket of preserves and a warm smile that reminded Evelyn that not everyone in town saw her as a mistake. "I'm happy for you," the older woman said, settling into a kitchen chair while Evelyn made tea. The twins were outside with Ethan, supposedly helping with chores but more likely getting in his way. "Ethan's been alone too long, and those girls need a mother's touch. You've been good for this family." "Thank you," Evelyn said, genuinely touched. "That means more than you know." "Mrs." Patterson's expression turned more serious. "I won't lie to you, though. There's talk. Some of it unkind. Mrs. Hutchins is making noise about the impropriety of the whole thing, and there are others who think Ethan's making a mistake." She held up a hand when Evelyn started to speak. "But there are just as many who see what I see. A good woman who's made a real difference here. Don't let the loud voices drown out the quiet support." After Mrs. Patterson left, Evelyn stood at the window watching Ethan teach the twins how to properly curry the horses. Maya was doing more playing than working, running the brush over the mare's flank in wild, ineffective strokes. June, still moving carefully after her ordeal, was more methodical, following Ethan's quiet instructions with concentration. They looked like a family. They felt like her family. And that was worth fighting for, worth facing down whatever judgment the town wanted to throw at her. The following Sunday, they went to church. Evelyn had dreaded this moment all week, knowing it would be her first public appearance since the engagement became common knowledge. She dressed in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Maya insisted made her eyes look pretty, and tried to steel herself for whatever came. The churchyard fell silent when their wagon pulled up. Evelyn felt every eye on them as Ethan helped her down, his hand steady at her elbow. The twins bounced ahead, apparently oblivious to the tension, calling greetings to other children with their usual enthusiasm. "Remember," Ethan murmured, his voice just for her, "we have nothing to be ashamed of." They walked toward the church entrance together, and Evelyn forced herself to keep her chin up and her eyes forward. She could feel the weight of judgment, could practically hear the whispers starting up in their wake, but she didn't let herself shrink or hide. Mrs. Hutchins intercepted them before they reached the door. "Ethan, Miss Moore, what a surprise to see you both this morning." "Mrs. Hutchins," Ethan greeted her coolly, "shouldn't be a surprise. We come most Sundays." "Yes, but I thought, perhaps, given the circumstances, you might prefer a quieter ceremony, somewhere more private." Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "Surely you can understand the talk this has generated. Some people are questioning the propriety of such a hasty engagement." "Some people should mind their own business," Ethan replied, his voice pleasant, but edged with steel. "Evelyn and I are getting married in this church in 2 weeks. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to stay home." Mrs. Hutchins' smile froze. "Well, I suppose we'll see how the town responds to that." "I suppose we will," Ethan agreed, and guided Evelyn past her into the church. Inside, the congregation's reaction was mixed. Some people nodded politely. Others deliberately looked away. A few, Mrs. Patterson among them, smiled with genuine warmth. The twins led them to their usual pew, settling in on either side of Evelyn with possessive satisfaction. The preacher's sermon that day seemed almost pointed. He spoke about judgment and mercy, about seeing the worth in others rather than their flaws, about the danger of letting fear and prejudice masquerade as righteousness. Evelyn couldn't tell if he was addressing the congregation's reaction to her engagement or speaking to some broader truth, but his words settled into her chest like stones building a foundation. After the service, as people gathered for the usual social hour, Ethan kept his hand at the small of Evelyn's back, a steady presence that gave her courage. The twins ran off to play with other children, and for the first time, Evelyn noticed that some of the other mothers watched them with something other than disapproval. "Miss Moore," a younger woman approached, someone Evelyn recognized from previous Sundays but had never spoken to. "I'm Rebecca Harrison. I wanted to say congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you," Evelyn managed, surprised. "I know some people are talking," Rebecca continued, lowering her voice slightly, "but I think what you did during the storm was incredibly brave. My husband told me about it. He helped Ethan search for scattered cattle afterward. You saved June's life." Before Evelyn could respond, another woman joined them, then another. They were young mostly, women who'd come west themselves looking for new starts, who understood what it meant to be judged by people who didn't know your story. "The twins seem so much happier since you arrived," one said. "And the house looks better too," another added. "Sarah was my friend, and she'd be glad Ethan found someone who cares for her daughters so well." The knot of conversation grew, and Evelyn found herself surrounded by women offering genuine support and friendship. Not everyone, certainly, Mrs. Hutchins and her circle kept their distance, their disapproval clear. But enough people stepped forward that Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, some tight fear she'd been carrying since she agreed to marry Ethan. Maybe this could work. Maybe she could build a life here despite the gossip and judgment. Maybe being brave enough to try was all that really mattered. That afternoon, while the twins helped Evelyn prepare Sunday dinner, Maya brought up something that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "When you marry Papa, what should we call you?" Evelyn looked up from the potatoes she was peeling. "What do you want to call me?" "Mama," June said immediately. no hesitation. "We want to call you Mama, but we weren't sure if we should ask or just do it or wait for you to say it was okay." Something hot and sweet flooded through Evelyn's chest. "You can call me Mama," she said softly. "I would be honored." Both girls launched themselves at her, nearly knocking her over in their enthusiasm. Evelyn caught them both, holding tight, and felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd never thought she'd have this. Children who wanted her, who chose her, who looked at her with uncomplicated love. "Does this mean we can help plan the wedding?" Maya asked, pulling back with her eyes shining. "Because June and I have ideas." Their ideas, it turned out, were extensive and enthusiastic, and mostly impossible. They wanted flowers everywhere, a cake as tall as the church, new dresses in matching colors, ribbons for the horses, music and dancing, and somehow, improbably, fireworks. Ethan listened to their elaborate plans that evening with barely concealed amusement. "We'll see what we can manage," he told them diplomatically. "But remember, the wedding is about me and Miss Moore, about me and Evelyn," he corrected himself, stumbling slightly over her first name, making promises to each other. "The fancy parts are nice, but they're not what matters." "What matters then?" June asked. Ethan looked at Evelyn across the table, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "What matters is that we're becoming a family. Officially, forever. Everything else is just decoration." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Evelyn sewed a new dress with help from Mrs. Patterson and Rebecca Harrison, who came to the ranch with fabric and pattern advice. The twins helped enthusiastically, their stitches crooked but earnest. They picked wildflowers and dried them for decorations, practiced songs they wanted to sing at the reception, and drove everyone mildly crazy with their excitement. Ethan spent his evenings working on something in the barn that he wouldn't let anyone see, disappearing after supper and returning with sawdust in his hair and a small, satisfied smile. When Evelyn asked what he was building, he just said it was a surprise. 3 days before the wedding, Evelyn's carefully maintained composure cracked. She was in the kitchen making bread when the reality of what she was doing hit her with overwhelming force. She was marrying a man she'd known less than 2 months. She was becoming mother to children who deserved better. She was claiming a place in a community that didn't want her. What if she failed? What if she couldn't be what they needed? What if she disappointed them all? Her hands stilled in the dough, and she realized she was shaking. "Evelyn?" Ethan's voice came from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. "What's wrong?" "I'm scared," she admitted, not looking at him. "I'm scared I'm going to fail you. All of you." She heard his footsteps cross the kitchen, felt his presence behind her. "Look at me." She turned slowly and found him watching her with such tenderness it made her chest ache. "You're not going to fail us," he said firmly. "You think I don't get scared too? I'm terrified. I'm marrying a woman I barely know, asking her to take on a ready-made family and a struggling ranch and a town full of gossips. What if I can't make you happy? What if this life isn't enough for you?" "It's more than enough," Evelyn said quietly. "That's what scares me. I'm not used to having enough. I don't know how to trust it." Ethan reached out and gently wiped flour from her cheek. "Then we'll learn together. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Two people figuring out how to build something neither of them could build alone." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," he agreed, "but it's worth doing anyway." He paused, then added, "I have something to show you. Come with me?" He led her to the barn, where he'd been spending his secret evenings. Inside, covered with a canvas tarp, was his project. He pulled the covering away to reveal a beautiful cedar chest, the wood smooth and golden, the corners fitted with careful precision. "For your things," he explained, suddenly awkward. "Sarah's hope chest is still in the bedroom, full of her mother's quilts and such. I thought you should have your own, a place to keep whatever matters to you." Evelyn ran her hand over the smooth wood, feeling the care in every joint, every sanded edge. He'd made this for her. This quiet, guarded man had spent his evenings building her something beautiful. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Open it," Ethan said. She lifted the lid and found a quilt inside, one she recognized immediately. It was the one the twins had been secretly working on for weeks, the one they'd hidden whenever she came near. The stitching was uneven, the colors chaotic, the overall effect slightly lopsided, and it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. They wanted you to have something handmade, Ethan explained. Something that showed you're part of this family before the wedding even happens. Evelyn touched the quilt with trembling fingers, tracing the crooked stitches that spelled out love in every imperfect seam. This was what she'd been missing her whole life. Not perfection or approval or meeting someone else's impossible standards. Just this. People who cared enough to make her something with their own hands, who saw her worth not despite her flaws, but including them. "Thank you," she managed, her voice rough with emotion. Ethan moved closer, his hand settling at her waist. "I know I'm not good with words. I know this isn't a fancy courtship like you probably had in Philadelphia. But I want you to know that I see you, Evelyn. Not some idea of who you should be, but who you actually are. And I choose that person. Every day I choose you." She turned in his arms and kissed him, the first real kiss they'd shared. It was gentle and tentative, both of them learning each other, both a little afraid of this new intimacy. When they pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "3 more days," he murmured. "Then it's official." 3 more days, she agreed, and let herself believe it was real. The night before the wedding, the twins refused to sleep. They were too excited, too full of anticipation, bouncing around the loft like caffeinated rabbits, while Evelyn tried unsuccessfully to settle them down. "What if it rains?" Maya worried. "What if the cake falls over? What if someone objects when the preacher asks if anyone objects?" "It won't rain, the cake will be fine, and no one's going to object," Evelyn soothed, tucking the blankets around them for the 4th time. "Now please, try to sleep. We have a big day tomorrow." "Are you nervous?" June asked, peering at her in the darkness. "Yes," Evelyn admitted honestly, "but good nervous, excited nervous." "We're excited too," Maya said. "We've wanted a mama for so long, and now we're getting you, and you're perfect, even though Mrs. Hutchins says you're not." Evelyn's chest tightened. "What did Mrs. Hutchins say?" The twins exchanged a look, clearly debating whether to tell her. Finally, June said, "She told some ladies at church that Papa was making a mistake, that you weren't the right kind of woman for a respectable rancher. But we told her she was wrong, and that you saved my life, and that makes you a hero, and heroes can marry whoever they want." "You said that to Mrs. Hutchins?" Evelyn asked, torn between horror and pride. "We did," Maya confirmed with satisfaction. "And then Mrs. Patterson told Mrs. Hutchins that maybe she should focus on her own business instead of everyone else's, and it was really good." Evelyn didn't know whether to laugh or cry. These fierce little girls defending her honor against the town's judgment, standing up for her when she'd barely learned to stand up for herself. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me." "We'll always believe in you," June said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "You're going to be our mama. That means you're stuck with us forever." "Forever," Evelyn repeated, and let the words settle into her bones like a promise. After the twins finally drifted off to sleep, Evelyn returned downstairs to find Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee. He looked up when she entered, and she saw her own nervous anticipation reflected in his eyes. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Keep thinking about tomorrow," he admitted, "about everything changing." Evelyn sat down across from him. "Having second thoughts?" "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "Just hoping I can be what you need, hoping this life is enough for you. Ethan Cole, you gave me a place when I had nowhere to go. Your daughters chose me when no one else saw anything worth choosing. This life, this family, it's more than I ever let myself hope for. You're more than enough." He reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Tomorrow, in front of everyone, I'm going to promise to love and honor you, to build a life with you, to stand beside you no matter what comes. And I want you to know I mean every word." "I know," Evelyn said. "I mean them too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked across the table, both preparing themselves for the step they'd take tomorrow. Finally, Ethan stood and drew her up with him. "We should both try to sleep. Big day coming." "Big day," Evelyn agreed. He walked her to her bedroom door, then surprised her by leaning down and kissing her softly. "Sleep well, Evelyn Moore. Tomorrow, you'll wake up as yourself for the last time." "What will I be after tomorrow?" "Evelyn Cole," he said simply. "My wife. Their mother. Home." The word wrapped around Evelyn's heart and held tight. Home. After a lifetime of wandering, of searching for a place where she fit, she'd finally found it in the most unexpected place imaginable. A Wyoming ranch with a quiet widower and two wild-hearted girls who'd pointed at her on a train platform and said, "We want her." Tomorrow, she'd make it official. Tomorrow, she'd stand in front of the town and claim her place. Tomorrow, she'd stop being the woman no one wanted and become the woman this family chose. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Morning arrived with the twins bursting into Evelyn's room before the sun had fully cleared the mountains, their faces bright with excitement and their hair already escaping the careful braids she'd woven the night before. "It's your wedding day," Maya announced, as though Evelyn might have forgotten. "Our wedding day," June corrected, bouncing on the edge of the bed. "Because we're all getting married together, kind of. We're becoming a real family." Evelyn sat up, her heart beating fast with a mixture of anticipation and terror. Today. It was happening today. In a few hours, she'd stand before the entire town and marry Ethan Cole, and there would be no going back, no pretending this was temporary, no protecting herself from the possibility of loss. "Are you ready?" Maya asked, studying Evelyn's face with surprising perception for a 7-year-old. "I'm terrified," Evelyn admitted honestly. "That's okay," June said with absolute confidence. "Papa says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the thing even though you're scared. And you're the bravest person we know, so you'll be fine." Out of the mouths of children, Evelyn thought, came wisdom that adults spent lifetimes trying to reclaim. She pulled both girls into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of sleep and sunshine and the rosewater they dabbed behind their ears in preparation for the big day. "You're right," she said. "I can be scared and brave at the same time." The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Patterson arrived with Rebecca Harrison and two other women who'd become unexpected allies, all of them bearing food for the reception and determined to help Evelyn get ready. They took over the house with cheerful efficiency, shooing Ethan and the twins outside while they transformed the main room into something approaching festive. "You didn't have to do all this," Evelyn protested as Mrs. Patterson arranged wildflowers in mason jars while Rebecca laid out platters of food. "Nonsense," Mrs. Patterson said briskly. "A wedding is a community event, whether certain people approve or not. Besides, Ethan Cole is a good man who's been alone too long, and you've been good for him and those girls. That's worth celebrating." The other women murmured agreement, and Evelyn felt warmth spread through her chest. She'd been so focused on the judgment, on Mrs. Hutchins and her circle of disapproval, that she'd failed to notice how many people had quietly stepped forward in support. They helped her into her wedding dress, the simple cream-colored cotton she'd sewn with their assistance. It wasn't fancy by Philadelphia standards, but it fit her properly, emphasized her best features, and made her feel, for perhaps the first time in her life, genuinely pretty. "Oh, honey," Mrs. Patterson said softly when Evelyn looked at herself in the small mirror. "You look beautiful." Evelyn studied her reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because she looked different exactly, but because something had changed in her eyes. The haunted, hunted look had been replaced by something steadier. Hope, maybe. Or determination, or simply the knowledge that she'd survived worse than a wedding and come out stronger. The twins appeared in the doorway, dressed in matching blue dresses that Evelyn had made, their hair finally tamed into proper braids woven with ribbons and tiny flowers. They looked at her with awe. "You look like a princess," Maya breathed. "A real one," June added. "Not the fancy kind from stories, but the kind who saves people and isn't afraid of storms." Evelyn's throat tightened. "You both look beautiful too, like the best daughters a woman could hope for." They beamed at that, then grabbed her hands. "Come on," Maya urged. "We have to get to the church. Papa's probably wearing a hole in the floor from pacing." The ride to town was surreal. Ethan had already left earlier to ensure everything was ready, so Evelyn traveled in Mrs. Patterson's wagon with the twins and the other women, her stomach tight with nerves. As they rolled down the main street toward the white church, Evelyn could see that half the town had turned out for the spectacle. Some had come out of genuine goodwill. Others, she suspected, had come to witness either her triumph or her humiliation, depending on their perspective. She saw Mrs. Hutchins standing with her cluster of friends, their expressions ranging from disapproving to openly hostile. But she also saw families she recognized from church, ranchers Ethan did business with, women who'd offered quiet support over the past weeks. The wagon stopped in front of the church, and for a moment Evelyn couldn't move. This was it, the moment where she either claimed her place or let fear win. The twins squeezed her hands simultaneously. "We're with you," June whispered. "June, always," Maya added. Evelyn climbed down from the wagon on trembling legs. Mrs. Patterson arranged her dress, smoothing imaginary wrinkles, while Rebecca adjusted the small bouquet of wildflowers the twins had picked that morning. Then the church bells began to ring, their sound carrying across the valley, announcing that something important was about to happen. The twins led the way up the church steps, and Evelyn followed, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the murmur of voices as people turned to watch her approach. At the church entrance, the preacher waited with a warm smile. "Miss Moore," he greeted her kindly. "Are you ready?" "I think so," Evelyn managed. "Remember," he said quietly, just for her, "this is about the promises you and Ethan are making to each other. Everything else is just noise. Focus on what matters." He was right, she realized. The town's opinion, Mrs. Hutchins' disapproval, the whispers and judgment, none of it mattered as much as the family waiting for her inside that church. The preacher opened the doors, and Evelyn saw the church packed with people, every pew filled, folks standing along the walls. Her first instinct was panic at so many eyes watching, judging, assessing. Then she saw Ethan. He stood at the front of the church, dressed in his Sunday best, his dark hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. He looked nervous and hopeful and slightly overwhelmed, and when his eyes found hers, everything else in the room seemed to fade into insignificance. He was looking at her the way every woman dreams of being looked at on her wedding day, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. The twins took their positions on either side of him, bouncing slightly with barely contained excitement. Maya gave Evelyn an enthusiastic wave that made several people chuckle. June blew her a kiss. Evelyn took a deep breath and started down the aisle. She'd imagined this moment would feel like running a gauntlet, forcing herself past hostile faces and whispered cruelty. Instead, she found herself noticing the smiles, genuine ones from people she'd helped over the past weeks, from mothers whose children the twins played with, from ranchers who'd seen her work beside Ethan. Not everyone was scowling, not everyone disapproved, and most importantly, the man waiting for her at the altar was looking at her like she was everything he needed. She reached Ethan's side and he took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "You look beautiful," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "So do you," she whispered back, and was rewarded with one of his rare transformative smiles. The preacher cleared his throat and addressed the congregation. "We're gathered here today to witness the marriage of Ethan Cole and Evelyn Moore, and to celebrate the formation of a family built on love, courage, and faith. I've known Ethan since he first came to Redwood Plains as a young man. I watched him build his ranch, marry his first wife, and weather the grief of losing her. I've seen him these past 3 years, working himself to exhaustion, trying to be everything his daughters needed, while his own heart stayed frozen." Evelyn felt Ethan's hand tighten on hers. "Then Miss Moore arrived," the preacher continued, "and I watched something remarkable happen. I watched a family that was merely surviving begin to truly live again. I watched 2 little girls blossom under the care of a woman who saw their worth. I watched a good man remember what it meant to hope." He paused, his gaze sweeping the congregation. "Some of you have questioned this union. You've whispered about propriety and hasty decisions, and whether Miss Moore is the right kind of woman for a man like Ethan." The church was utterly silent. Evelyn felt her face heat with embarrassment, but Ethan's hand remained steady in hers. "Let me tell you what I've seen," the preacher said firmly. "I've seen a woman risk her life in a flooding creek to save a child. I've seen her face down a cattle stampede without hesitation. I've seen her sit up for 3 days and nights nursing a sick girl back to health. I've seen her bring warmth and laughter back into a house that had forgotten both. And I've seen her stand here today with more courage than most of us can claim, willing to build a life in a community that hasn't always welcomed her. His voice softened. That, my friends, is exactly the right kind of woman. The kind who loves with action, not just words. The kind who chooses courage over comfort. The kind who sees worth in others and reflects it back to them. Evelyn's eyes burned with unshed tears. Beside her, she heard Maya sniffle and saw June wiping her eyes on her sleeve. Now then, the preacher said, his tone shifting to something more formal. Shall we proceed with the vows? The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Ethan's voice was steady as he promised to love and honor her, to stand beside her in joy and hardship, to build a life together that honored both their pasts and their future. When it was Evelyn's turn, she looked into his winter sky eyes and promised the same, her voice stronger than she'd expected. Then came the moment she hadn't anticipated. The preacher looked at the twins and said, Maya and June, you're not just witnessing this marriage, you're part of it. Do you promise to welcome Evelyn as your mother, to love and respect her, to build this family together? We do! Both girls shouted in unison, loud enough to make the congregation laugh. And Evelyn, the preacher continued, do you promise to love and care for these children, to guide them and support them, to be their mother in every way that matters? I do, Evelyn said, her voice breaking slightly. With everything I have. The twins abandoned their positions and threw themselves at Evelyn, wrapping their arms around her waist in a fierce hug that nearly knocked her over. The congregation laughed again, this time with genuine warmth. Well then, the preacher said, smiling broadly, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife, and officially recognize you as a family. Ethan, you may kiss your bride. Ethan's kiss was gentle and tender, and held a promise of deeper intimacy to come. When they pulled apart, the church erupted in applause. Even some of the people who'd been skeptical were clapping, caught up in the moment despite their reservations. As they turned to face the congregation as a family, Ethan's arm around Evelyn's waist, the twins clutching their hands, Evelyn saw Mrs. Hutchins sitting stiffly in her pew, her expression sour. But she also saw Mrs. Patterson dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, saw Rebecca Harrison beaming, saw rough ranchers who looked suspiciously misty-eyed. They walked back down the aisle together, and Evelyn realized she wasn't the same woman who'd walked up it just minutes before. She was Evelyn Cole now. Wife, mother, part of something larger than herself. The reception was held in the churchyard, tables laden with food the community had brought, children running wild while adults gathered in clusters to talk and eat and celebrate. Evelyn braced herself for continued judgment, but found instead that most people seemed willing to accept the marriage as fact and treat her accordingly. Congratulations, Mrs. Cole, person after person said, and each time Evelyn felt a small thrill at hearing her new name. Of course, not everyone was gracious. Mrs. Hutchins made a point of stopping by where Evelyn stood with Ethan, her smile sharp enough to cut. Well, Ethan, I hope you know what you're doing, she said with false sweetness. Marriage is a serious commitment, especially when children are involved. Before Ethan could respond, something unexpected happened. One of the older ranchers, a man named Tom Miller, who rarely spoke at social gatherings, stepped forward. Begging your pardon, Mrs. Hutchins, but I was there the day of the storm. I helped Ethan search for scattered cattle afterward, and I heard the whole story. Miss Moore, Mrs. Cole, jumped into a raging creek to save June without a moment's hesitation. Then she sat up for 3 days straight, making sure the girl pulled through. He looked at Evelyn with respect in his weathered face. That's the kind of mother those girls need, the kind who acts instead of talks. Ethan chose well. Other voices joined in, people who'd witnessed Evelyn's transformation of the Cole household, who'd seen her work and her care and her courage. The girls are happier than they've been in years, someone said. The house looks like a home again, another added. She stood up to a stampede, for heaven's sake, a third voice chimed in. I'd say that earns her a place here. Mrs. Hutchins' expression curdled. Well, I suppose everyone's entitled to their opinion. She turned and walked away, her circle of friends trailing behind her like resentful ducklings. Ethan pulled Evelyn closer, his arm solid around her waist. You all right? Better than all right, Evelyn said, and meant it. She was watching the twins play with other children, watching her new husband accept congratulations from his friends, watching the community slowly but surely make space for her in their midst. Not everyone would accept her. Some people, like Mrs. Hutchins, would probably never stop judging. But enough people had stepped forward, had spoken up, had chosen to see her worth. That was enough. As the afternoon wore into evening, someone brought out a fiddle and impromptu dancing began. Ethan, who claimed he couldn't dance, managed a creditable waltz with Evelyn while the twins circled around them, laughing and spinning. Then other couples joined in, and soon the churchyard was full of music and movement and joy. Evelyn danced with the twins, with Tom Miller, who proved surprisingly light on his feet despite his age, with several other ranchers who wanted to officially welcome her to the community. Each dance felt like another thread weaving her into the fabric of this place, making her belong in ways that went beyond legal documents or spoken vows. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the mountains and the dancing wound down, Ethan reclaimed her. He led her to the edge of the crowd, to a quiet spot where they could watch the celebration without being in the middle of it. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Honestly, I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to stand up and say this was all a mistake." Ethan turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "It's not a mistake, Evelyn. It's the most right thing I've done in 3 years. You're my wife now, mother to my daughters, partner in this life. And I intend to spend every day making sure you never doubt that you belong here." "I'm still afraid," she admitted quietly. "Afraid I'll disappoint you. Afraid I'm not strong enough for this." "You jumped into a flooding creek," Ethan reminded her, echoing his earlier words. "You faced down a stampede. You stood in front of this entire town and claimed your place despite knowing some of them didn't want you here. Evelyn, you're the strongest person I know, but strength doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you keep going anyway." She looked at this man who'd seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, who'd defended her to his community, who'd built her a cedar chest with his own hands and filled it with a crooked quilt made by his daughters, who'd chosen her not despite her flaws, but including them. "I love you," she said, the first time she'd spoken the words aloud. "I know it's fast and probably foolish, but I love you, Ethan Cole." His face transformed, that rare, beautiful smile breaking across it like sunrise. "It's not foolish. It's brave. And I love you too. Have since you stood on that train platform looking terrified but refusing to break, since you brought warmth back into my house and laughter back into my daughters' lives, since you proved every single day that worth has nothing to do with what people think and everything to do with what you choose to do." He kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise, and Evelyn let herself believe finally and completely that she'd found her home. The twins found them eventually, dragging them back to the party with demands that there be cake cutting and more dancing, and that someone please tell the story again about how Evelyn saved June from the creek. As they rejoined the celebration, hands linked, family complete, Evelyn caught sight of her reflection in the church window. The woman looking back wasn't the broken, rejected person who'd stepped off the train weeks ago. She was someone new, someone who'd learned that being chosen by the right people mattered more than being accepted by everyone. Someone who'd discovered that courage meant showing up even when you were terrified. Someone who'd found worth not by changing herself, but by finding people who saw her clearly and loved what they saw. The party continued as the stars came out, stringing across the Wyoming sky like diamonds on velvet. Eventually, people began drifting toward their wagons and homes, calling goodbyes and congratulations, promising to visit soon. Mrs. Patterson hugged Evelyn tight and whispered, "You did good, honey. Real good." Finally, it was just the four of them, Ethan and Evelyn and the twins, loading into their wagon for the ride home. The girls were so exhausted they fell asleep almost immediately, curled together in the wagon bed like puppies. Ethan drove slowly, letting the horse set its own pace through the moonlit night. His hand found Evelyn's, their fingers interlacing naturally. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to stay. For giving us a chance. For becoming part of this family." "Thank you for seeing me," Evelyn replied. "For looking past what everyone else saw and finding something worth keeping." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon creaking rhythmically, the night air cool and sweet with sage. When the ranch came into view, its familiar silhouette backlit by stars, Evelyn felt something settle deep in her chest. Home. Not the house she'd grown up in, not the city that had rejected her, but this rough frontier ranch with its weathered buildings and endless sky and the people who'd chosen her. Ethan helped the sleepy twins into the house and up to their loft, both girls mumbling incoherent goodnights and demands for breakfast tomorrow. Then he returned to where Evelyn stood in the main room, suddenly nervous now that they were alone, now that the celebration was over and reality was setting in. "I know this is all very new," Ethan said carefully, reading her nervousness. "We can take things as slow as you need. There's no rush." Evelyn looked at this good man who'd given her everything: safety, family, belonging, love, and realized she was done being afraid. "I don't want to go slow," she said. "I've spent my whole life being cautious and careful and protecting myself from being hurt. I'm done with that. I want this life, this family, this marriage, all of it, starting now." Relief and desire flashed across Ethan's face. He crossed to her, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak. When he swept her up and carried her toward his bedroom, their bedroom now, she went willingly, ready to begin this new chapter of her life. Later, lying in the darkness with Ethan's arm around her and the sound of the twins' soft breathing drifting down from the loft, Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Philadelphia's rejection to the train platform's humiliation to this moment of complete belonging. It had taken courage she didn't know she possessed, and faith in people she'd had no reason to trust. But she'd done it. She'd built a life from nothing, claimed a place where no one had wanted to give her one, and found a family that chose her not despite who she was, but because of it. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan murmured, his voice rough with sleep and satisfaction. "How far I've traveled," Evelyn said. "Not in miles, but in becoming someone I never thought I could be." "You were always that person," Ethan corrected gently. "You just needed the right place to bloom." She turned in his arms to face him. "And you needed someone to see past your walls and find the warmth you kept hidden." "We saved each other then," Ethan said. "No," Evelyn replied, thinking of the twins asleep upstairs, of the community that had slowly opened to her, of the courage she'd discovered in herself. "We saved ourselves. We just did it together." The next morning arrived with the twins' voices and the smell of coffee and the ordinary magic of a new day beginning. Evelyn woke in Ethan's arms, saw sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, and felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was her life now, her family, her home. At breakfast, the twins chattered excitedly about the wedding, about all the people who'd come, about the dancing and the cake, and how pretty Evelyn had looked. "Can we call you Mama now?" June asked, though they'd already been doing so for weeks. "Like, officially?" "Officially," Evelyn confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. "Mama," Maya tried it out, grinning. "Our Mama. That sounds so good." After breakfast, while Ethan went out to tend the animals and the twins played in the yard, Evelyn stood at the kitchen window and watched her family. She thought about the woman she'd been, afraid, convinced of her own worthlessness, expecting nothing but more rejection. She thought about how easy it would have been to stay small, to refuse Ethan's offer that first day, to let fear make all her decisions. But she hadn't. She'd chosen courage, even when it terrified her. She'd chosen to trust, even when past experience suggested she shouldn't. She'd chosen to believe she deserved good things, even when the world had spent years convincing her otherwise. And those choices had made all the difference. Through the window, she watched Ethan laugh at something Maya said, watched June chase chickens with determined enthusiasm, watched the mountains rise in the distance and the endless sky stretch overhead. This was Wyoming, raw and beautiful and unforgiving to those who weren't strong enough to meet it on its own terms. But Evelyn was strong enough. She'd proven it to herself and to everyone else. She'd survived the train platform humiliation and the town's judgment and the storm that had nearly taken everything. She'd learned that strength wasn't about being perfect or meeting impossible standards. It was about showing up, doing the work, loving fiercely, and refusing to let other people's limitations define your worth. The twins ran inside, breathless and laughing, demanding that Evelyn come see the new kittens in the barn. Ethan followed them, his eyes finding hers across the room, his smile holding all the promise of their shared future. "Come on, Mama." Maya grabbed her hand. "You have to see them. There are 5 and they're perfect." Evelyn let herself be pulled outside into the sunshine, into her life, into the family that had chosen her first and continued choosing her every day. Behind them, the house stood solid and welcoming, no longer empty but filled with the sounds and smells and spirit of people who belonged to each other. She'd come west expecting nothing and found everything. She'd stepped off a train as someone discarded and stepped into a life as someone cherished. She'd learned that home wasn't a place but a feeling, that family was made by choice, not blood, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was believe you deserved to be loved. As they walked to the barn, the twins chattering on either side of her and Ethan's hand warm in hers, Evelyn Cole looked at the life spread before her and felt nothing but gratitude. For the courage that had brought her here, for the family that had welcomed her, for the love that had transformed her. She was no longer the woman cast aside by her parents, mocked by Philadelphia society, or humiliated on a train platform. She was a wife, a mother, a partner in building something that mattered. She was someone who'd been chosen not despite her flaws, but including them. Someone who'd proven that worth came from within rather than from others' approval. She was home. She was loved. She was enough. And that, she realized as the twins pulled her into the barn to see the kittens and Ethan's laughter echoed in the rafters, was everything she'd ever needed. The story of Evelyn Cole began with rejection and exile, with a woman judged and found wanting by people too blind to see her true worth. But it didn't end there. It ended with belonging, with family, with a love built on courage and choice, and the absolute certainty that sometimes the people who reject you are simply clearing the path toward the ones who will choose you forever. And forever, for Evelyn, had finally begun.